Hello and welcome to Part-Time Gaming, a series where we analyze and rate video games from the perspective of a full-time working professional. My goal with this series is to give people with full-time jobs and busy lives like myself reviews of games that specifically analyze how compatible they are with the young professional's lifestyle. Today, we are taking a look at Civilization VI. This is the first and only Civilization game that I have ever played, so my views on this game are purely regarding Civ 6 itself, and not how it stacks up to the other games in the Civilization series. This is not an in-depth review of the game. Instead, I will rate the game on a scale of 1 to 10 based on the following 5 criteria, all of which are being looked at through the lens of a full-time working professional. Session length, which is how long a general session needs to last to be satisfying. Game length, which is how many hours it generally takes to beat the main story of the game. Pick up and play, which is how easy the game is to pick it up and start playing no matter how long it's been since you've played it. Engagement, which is how engaged your mind absolutely has to be while playing. And finally, frustration, which is how frustrating, or not, the moment-to-moment gameplay is. First up is session length. This is how long a general session needs to last in order to be satisfying. Can you pick it up and play for 20 minutes and feel satisfied, or do you need multiple hours in a session to make any meaningful progress? Oftentimes after work, you're extremely tired and may just want to play a game for a little bit, but not necessarily get wrapped up in something that may take an hour or more to complete. For Civilization VI, this partly depends on your willpower. This game is turn-based, like a board game, meaning you have a set number of actions that you can perform before having to click the next turn button to restart the cycle. While this presumably would lead you to believe that it's very easy to pick an arbitrary stopping point, in reality, when you click the next turn button, you're usually left thinking, okay, just one more turn, before starting the cycle over again. This oftentimes leads you to play for much longer than you originally intended, which isn't necessarily a bad thing. What's important is that despite a usual lack of self-control when you're playing, the game itself does offer a natural stopping point that frequently occurs that makes it easy to put the game down as soon as you want to be finished playing. This is important because, as I'll discuss in a minute, a full game of Civilization can take a long time, so you don't want to feel like you have to make a lot of progress in your session before being able to stop. In my opinion, this is one of the categories in which Civilization shines. There have been times where I will play it for 8 or 9 turns, amounting to about 15 minutes of gameplay or less, before turning it off and going about my business. Other times, I've gotten completely lost playing a game, spending hours trying to conquer another country or build up my cities. The game allows you to spend exactly as much time playing it that you want, and that is extremely important to me. For the session length category, I give Civilization VI a 9 out of 10. The second category we're going to look at is game length, which is how long it generally takes to beat the main story of a game, not including optional side quests, collectibles, achievements, etc. A game with an incredibly long campaign can actually be a deterrent for people like me. When I choose to play a video game, I need to eventually finish the story in order to feel like I got everything out of the game that it has to offer. This need to complete things is a common trait among people that play video games, and it is why collectathon games are usually so popular. If a game requires an absurd amount of time to beat, it means the little time that I now have in my life to play video games will be solely focused on this one game for a very long time. Instead, I would rather have a shorter, solid experience that I can complete before moving on to the next game or playing any other modes that the game has to offer, such as multiplayer or non-story-based modes. Civilization VI doesn't have a story mode. Instead, following the board game-like formula, you set up and play individual games as you see fit. Depending on the difficulty level you choose, your experience, and your playstyle, a typical game could take you anywhere from 6 to 20 hours. There are 5 victory conditions: culture, domination, religion, science, and score. Each of these victory conditions requires a different amount of work you need to put in to meet them, so the condition you choose to win by is one of the biggest factors in how long your game will last. For example, trying to win by the religion condition tends to take longer than others in most games, other than a score victory, which can only be achieved if the in-game turn counter hits its upper limit. To obtain a cultural victory, you need to attract tourists, which you do by generating high amounts of culture and tourism. Victory is achieved once you attract more visiting tourists from every civilization than they have domestic tourists in their cities. In order to achieve a domination victory, you need to conquer the original capital of every other civilization in the game. You must have a very strong military to do this, as well as the necessary technologies that allow you to have up-to-date units. For example, you probably don't want to try to conquer a modern city using warriors brandishing clubs. A religious victory is achieved when your religion becomes the predominant religion in every civilization in the game. A religion is considered to be predominant in a civilization if it is followed by more than 50% of the cities in that respective civilization. To gain a science victory, you must accomplish a few milestones, each of which have their own conditions you must meet in order to complete them. These major milestones consist of the following: 1. Launch a satellite. 2. Land a human on the moon. And 3. Establish a Martian colony. A score victory only occurs when no civilization in the game achieves any other victory before the in-game turn counter runs out, which is in 2050 AD on standard speed. When this happens, the civilization with the highest overall score wins the game. A civilization's overall score is calculated using several different metrics, such as number of cities owned, each district owned, number of civics researched, etc. As mentioned before, each of these win conditions will take a different amount of time to achieve. Having never played a game of Civilization before, it took me about 14 hours of playtime to complete a game on easy mode, though this is also partly because I spent a while reading the in-game tips and encyclopedia. Considering this is the amount of time it takes to complete a single game in a video game that begs to have multiple playthroughs with different leaders and tactics, you will almost certainly need to sink a lot of hours into this game to get a well-rounded experience outside of just 1 or 2 matches. For these reasons, I can't personally give Civilization VI a high score in this category. For the game length category, I give Civilization VI a 4 out of 10. The next category on the list is pick up and play. When you play the game for the first time, how quickly can you get a grip on the controls and systems? Or if you go several weeks or months without playing, will you need to take a lot of time to relearn the controls, gameplay loop, objectives, etc.? Or will it only take a few minutes to get back into the groove of things? With Civilization VI, this is actually somewhat of a difficult category. On the one hand, Civ 6 is an incredibly complicated game with a multitude of different systems all working concurrently that you must learn and account for when playing the game. The first time you play a game of Civilization, you will undoubtedly have absolutely no idea of what is going on. There is so much to think about and consider on every single turn you make that it can be overwhelming trying to decide if you are making the right decisions. Which path do you take in the civics tree? What type of religion do you want to found? What should you be researching in the technology tree? Will you need to create a lot of combat units in case you get attacked by a neighboring country? Or should you use those turns to build a wonder or a new district to expand your city instead? You must consider all of these things every single turn, and your choices absolutely will affect the game later down the line, if not in just a couple of turns. On the other hand, Civilization VI has an advisor feature, where the game gives you an advisor that will offer hints and suggestions, much like a political advisor would do in real life. This comes in the form of voiceovers that teach you about something new you just unlocked or tell you about an aspect of the game, such as how to interact with the smaller city-states that appear on the map. Your advisor also appears in the form of a symbol next to units or districts that are currently advantageous for you to build, or as a symbol next to a technology tree node that would behoove you to unlock based on the current state of your civilization. For veterans of the Civilization franchise, this feature can come off as somewhat of an annoyance, but for a brand new player like me, it was incredibly useful to have. It genuinely felt like I had someone with me advising me on what actions to take when it felt like I was drowning in a sea of features and decisions. And when you come back to the game after not playing it for a while, it's nice to have someone there to help you get back on the saddle without having to figure out every single little thing out for yourself. Finally, one other thing that helps you get on your feet or get back into the game after a hiatus is the Civilopedia. This is an in-game encyclopedia that has info on basically every single aspect of the game, from how housing affects your cities to how tourism function works. There is an almost overwhelming amount of information to be found in the Civilopedia. Your in-game advisor will point you here frequently, and it can be a great place to brush up on the many different aspects of this complicated game. That being said, I understand how the prospect of basically having to read an entire book of info to understand the depths of this game can be considered a detractor for many. It certainly was for me at times. When I look at all of these aspects of the game, it makes it difficult to score it based on this category. Civ 6 is most certainly not an easy game to get into, but it also includes multiple features within the game that help to teach you and guide you through it. Even with these features, it's still easy to have a feeling of what the heck am I doing while playing it. And as someone who usually had less than an hour to play each time, I never felt like there was a moment where I got it, so to speak. I was always having to learn and read the Civilopedia each time I played, and there was a sensation of being blind while playing, as if there was something going on that I didn't have knowledge of and couldn't account for in my strategies. For this reason, I give Civilization VI a 5 out of 10 in the pick up and play category. The fourth category is engagement. Oftentimes you're really tired after work, so playing games that require a lot of mental focus can be extremely draining. This category looks to see if you can play slightly zoned out, or if you need to stay completely focused the entire time you're playing the game. Once again, this is a difficult metric to measure Civ 6 by. On the one hand, as I've discussed already, this is a very complicated game. There's a lot going on and a lot to keep track of every single turn, and if you aren't paying attention, you can really screw yourself over quickly. If you aren't attending to the needs of your citizens while you're off trying to conquer a rival country, for example, your people can revolt against you. Or if you haphazardly upgrade your technology tree without paying attention to what you're researching, you can miss out on key strategies and bonuses that you can use for your civilization. However, Civ 6 does have a method to help you make sure you're paying attention to most of what is happening in the game. In the bottom right corner of the screen, there is a button that you can click that will automatically take you to something that needs to be done in a given turn. Clicking this button will take you to any units you have that you haven't given orders to that turn, or it will let you know when one of your cities needs to start producing something new and take you to the production screen for that city. It will also let you know when you need to start researching a new technology or civic. This can quickly become a button that almost plays the game for you if you aren't paying attention. In terms of this engagement metric that we are judging the game against, this is a plus. It allows you to let the game make some of the decisions for you if you're tired or just wanting to play around for a bit without thinking too deeply about it. That being said, if you are solely relying on this button to play the game, you aren't going to do well, especially on higher difficulties. The majority of the strategy that needs to be employed in this game will still come from the decisions you make and will not be able to be accomplished while you're on autopilot clicking this button. So on one hand, if you are playing the game on lower difficulties, you can certainly zone out a bit and still play and enjoy this game without being totally obliterated by your opponents. But if you are trying to play on higher difficulties, you definitely need to be thinking heavily about each and every decision you are making. For the engagement category, I give Civilization VI a 6 out of 10. Our fifth and final category is frustration. If you spend a lot of the time that you're playing mad or annoyed, it can be difficult to get yourself to play the game since you probably don't have much time to play in the first place, and you don't want that limited time you do have to be spent in a bad mood. This category is somewhat abstract and can be heavily affected by things like your skill level and the game's difficulty. But just because a game is hard does not mean it's frustrating. Frustration comes from mechanics that seem unfair and make you feel like you can't plan for them no matter how good you are at the game. This can lead to a feeling of helplessness. But there are things games can do to help alleviate frustration, such as giving you the option to select different difficulty modes and allowing you to save often. In my experience, Civilization VI is not a frustrating game. It can certainly be a difficult game at times, and there are times where you may feel somewhat blindsided by the decision the CPU makes, but the game never feels unfair. You always have an option you can take to counter an attack or prevent an enemy from getting ahead of you in one of the victory condition categories. Even if you lose a game, you're thinking about the things you could have done differently or how you're going to counter the strategy your enemy employed next time you play, rather than thinking something like, that was bullcrap, or how are you supposed to compete against that? You truly feel like you are competing against the enemy instead of fighting the game. This is one of Civilization's greatest strengths, in my opinion. There was never a time while playing this game that I felt like it was unfair. I always felt like I had the tools I needed to accomplish my goals. Even when I first started playing and didn't even know the basic mechanics, I had a feeling that I had what I needed at my disposal in order to effectively compete against my enemies. All I had to do was read the Civilopedia and listen to my virtual advisor, and occasionally do some internet searches to learn what I needed to do. And even though the CPU would get ahead of me frequently in my early playthrough, I was always able to catch up and employ strategies of my own to combat them. It always felt like the results of the game were due to my actions rather than being the result of something completely out of my control. Due to this, I give Civilization VI a 9 out of 10 in the frustration category. In conclusion, I think that Civilization VI is a great game for working professionals that is sometimes hindered by its own complexity. You can play the game in short bursts and have a good time, but in order to truly experience all that this game has to offer, you will need to sink many hours into it and learn many minute details and strategies. But if you want to have a good time without taking it too seriously, you can just play the game on easy mode and have fun building a massive civilization to conquer the world. My overall score for Civilization VI, based on the criteria that I have discussed, is a 6.6. This has been Part Time Gaming. Thank you, and God bless.